one of the things that I noticed right away when I took your class was that you viewed drawing as a discipline. And you sort of approached it with a simultaneous passion and a kind of like clinical knowability. It was very demystified in your class. And a lot of the drawing classes, I've never had an anatomy class before that. And a lot of the drawing classes that I had before, if they touched on topics like these, it was very mystical. It was like how it is that a person came to know anatomy was through some very diffuse methodology that never really discussed the issue directly, but somehow, came to it through some combination of intuition, like talent, something like that. And so it was very refreshing for me to be in that kind of environment, like the kind of, besides the kind of teacher you were, the kind of environment you created was one in which we studied, and I feel like we treated it like a discipline. And we treated it like a subject, like a subject that had a history that was worth unraveling and worth, approaching in that way. And so the question I wanted to ask you maybe was, and maybe you're interested in this, maybe not, but, or maybe we're getting a little bit off topic, but how do you feel about something like talent? Because, the story that I was expecting was that, at least somewhere in that high school, grammar school thing, you were going to tell me that you were drawing all the time. And that's my story. I've been drawing since, there wasn't a time that I don't remember having some kind of scribbler in my hand. And so, how do you feel about like the idea or the concept of talent, having come to it late when you did, and in the way that you did, where it sounds like it came from a study. It came from like a research process, almost as much as it did an artistic process.
Yeah. Wow. Well, let's see. I think real talent, real creativity is a lightning strike. And I think that as a teacher, you're always sort of on the lookout for signs of real talent, and you're always anxious that your biases are going to blind you to it. I found talent. I found great talent in students, who could or sometimes couldn't, quote unquote, draw constructively. Right. It seemed to, just sort of, talent takes on a life of its own in the classroom. This was all rather beside the point. My brief was to just gorge the contents of my brain on the topic of how anatomy has been approached artistically in drawings, and to point out, what it is that's discernible in drawings of the sort that evinces talent. So, I would approach it by saying, well, talent is usually shows up as a sort of a non-literalism. Talent, shows up not just as technical facility, but as a kind of a curiosity in making that is, that's able to see all the different components of the process and to kind of explore what happens when you take one of the unheralded parts of the process and make it the guide of the process. And so, talent always seems to revive the process in that way. So, I mean, I always expected the talented students were going to be the ones who, in some regard, were going to reflect something I'd said back to me in a way that I barely recognized, and that was a thrill when that happened. I had at Lyme and in New York, I had students who would do that. You were included, Jesse. So in terms of in terms of how I kind of approached it and approached anatomy in the class, you mentioned that it was sort of a subject that could be studied, and that it wasn't mysterious, notwithstanding everything I just said about talent. I guess in college I was taught to be precise in my communication, and I was given tools for kind of wrestling a subject down analytically, right? So you can bring a subject under intellectual control, and so I think artistic anatomy is an instance where individuals bring their subject under intellectual control, and then the subject I was teaching, which was how that happened, I was always interested in bringing under intellectual control, and then sort of sharing the results of that effort with students. What was wonderful about it is that anatomy has many sort of concrete components. There are books. There's sort of lots of groundwork. Lots of things are established. There's lots of agreement on anatomical phenomena. We can subject it to sort of geometrical analysis, and in doing so, clarify that phenomenon. And particularly if your mind works in a geometrical along geometric lines, it was a great subject. This is so what you're kind of mentioning is just sort of educational mindset and the values that I abided by in approaching my classes. I'd rather the mysterious sounding statements, the enigmatic statements, lack of clarity, fuzziness. I always sort of bothered me. So I tried to steer as much in the other direction as possible without making anatomy into something mechanical. But always kind of point to its the artistry involved. And there's something I want to mention to you I think is important. In The Nude, Kenneth Clark begins the book by saying the nude is a form of art, and that art form, is sort of comprised of practices that we could sort of codify, but it was also sort of animated by other things. And so by treating it as anatomy as a form of art rather than a subject of art, I think I was able to see it a little differently than I think it tends to be, approached. Because in most of the approaches I've seen, anatomy is treated as a subject of art. So it is simply it's just a series of facts that need to be absorbed, and once absorbed, they can be sort of without. Once absorbed, they can then be sort of exported into one's artwork.
Deployed.
And so I just think that's not the mojo at all. It's not what I see in any of the drawings that have these have an anatomical, I won't call it a basis, but an anatomical flavor, and that evince these sort of signs of life. For instance, the Cambiasso. Cambiasso drawings are no less anatomical for not articulating origins and insertions of individual muscles. So they show the body's major masses, each moving dynamically in its own trajectory. And is that an anatomical fact? Well, yeah, I guess it's an anatomical fact. What anatomy does is it kind of rushes in behind that artistic idea and kind of fleshes it out to some extent. The artistic idea isn't anatomical. The artistic idea that governs artistic anatomy isn't anatomical per se. And taking stock of the body's movements and making those movements vivid and precise. And that sometimes calls for a specific anatomical sequence of form, and sometimes it doesn't. Subject of art anatomy is not. It will always fall flat if approached that way. But as a form of art, now we're talking.